Hello everybody. I'm really sorry I'm not there, but I'm very glad to be doing this. Let's start by watching people chit-chatting with the sound off. There is a brisk, intense verbal exchange, of course, but look also at the rapid fire of the non-verbal exchanges. Eye contacts, nuances of facial expressions, body language, the way that they tune into each other, read each other, psychologically and emotionally connecting in shared enjoyment. And I think in this video we can see them all expertly deploying what we in the intensive interaction community call the fundamentals of communication. If these adults had not successfully learnt these things in infancy, it's unlikely they could be indulging successfully in that rapid fire verbal and non-verbal sharing. Infants start learning these attainments from day one. It's arguable, isn't it, that this is the most complicated learning of your life, and there is a huge volume of it to be, what's the new buzzword, mastered. Even though the learning is a huge quantity of incredibly complex things, if all goes well, babies learn these things rapidly. They learn the fundamentals of communication, amongst other things, in free-flowing, relaxed, stress-free situations. Basically, they learn how to interact during interactions with adults. In these situations, the baby, the learner, is, of course, we know now, not a passive recipient of anything. No, the learner is engaged, active, dynamically involved in making decisions, being creative with what-if questions, experimenting within the security of the situation. It seems to me that the baby is able to indulge the best kind of discovery learning. That's interesting, isn't it? Because the parents already know everything the baby is discovering, yet the research on parent-infant interaction that commenced with video in the 1970s shows that they do not attempt to teach these things to the baby in a directive, didactic manner. Rather, the parent's style is more about responsiveness, a free-flowing interaction with deep mutual enjoyment as the main motivation, and the parent largely responding to the baby rather than in any way directing. And most frequently responding by imitating and joining in with what the baby just did. For a person at a very early level of development, with very limited powers and a fragile emotionality, the logic of this style is radiant. Is it not? Furthermore, very few parents, I submit, would be writing an IEP, a lesson plan, using smart targets, or in any way operating with an objective for this most crucial learning activity of the little person's life. Intensive interaction was developed by two main means. Firstly, by a long process of practical, sensitive, reflective trial and error within classrooms. Secondly, by studying and borrowing from the mostly US research literature on parent-infant interaction. Therefore, the approach works with the teacher setting up free-flowing, pleasurable interactions, tuning in, sometimes of course for our purposes, micro-tuning to the learner. Not doing too much, holding back and letting the learner mostly go first, creating the content and the flow by responding to things the learner does, most frequently by doing more or less what the learner just did. Once the learner gets the hang of this structure, they enjoyably start experimenting with all the possibilities, and then they are dynamically onto this pathway of discovery learning of very, very complicated stuff. Again, we don't write smart targets or anything. You can't. These activities don't fit to that. Smart targets here don't help. They hinder. Hi, Penny. So, these activities are not teacher-directed in our usual sense. There is not a teaching learning session objective to be achieved. A session objective does not help. It's the wrong model. The activity just flows for a while, then fizzles out. Then you do it again and again, frequently. Consider for those babies how many thousands of repetitions of those activities they experience in order for their communication powers to grow in sophistication and complexity day by day by day. So, if intensive interaction is nothing like the way we traditionally teach, does this mean it is not proper teaching and learning? What is its pedagogical model? Those of you who go back as far as I do in our work will, I hope, relate to this diagram of classical directive teaching and its most extreme expression of task analysis using probably behavioural methods. This and its relatives or derivatives may be referred to as the linear model, methodically sequencing the learning into a coherent feeling progression. Most of our work is still dominated by models like this, I think. It is popular and handy for teacher accountability and for the politician's fantasy that we all exactly know what we are doing and are able to teach everything with great precision and conviction. So why do we not use this sensible model for teaching the fundamentals of communication? Part of the answer is that the natural model of early infancy is highly successful for nearly all of us. Another part of the answer lies in a proper appreciation of the nature of the learning. Apologies. Let's all gaze at this diagram for a while, please. Controversy rages, even within myself, as to whether I have facility with meaningful diagrams. I've attempted to put something about what I think we know about this enormously complicated learning into a sort of one-look thought. As you can see, the sense here is that what we call the fundamentals of communication, examples along the top, these actually are not really the learning outcomes. The fundamentals of communication, these are words that describe the gradually visible outer behaviours of a person who is conducting the learning. The learning is actually everything that is going on beneath the surface. The development of the brain processes that grow because of the learning experiences, support the learning, produce the visible performances of a communicator. Research on neural development is flying at present, and we are increasingly confident, aren't we, to associate real learning with the development of neural links in areas of the brain that support performances. So, here surely is one reason why it would be folly to set lesson objectives around simply directing or conditioning the learner into the production of the visible behaviours of the fundamentals of communication. That attempt would be completely ignoring the need for the learner to be a highly dynamic participator in all of the complexity, undergoing dynamic experiential learning that generates all of the cognitive processes and substructures. That, I guess, is why nature has gradually evolved the gentle pedagogy we see with babies. And that, I offer, is one of the most rational criticisms of any use of such as operant conditioning. Okay, maybe that's one thing. Then we have some insight into why the learning activities operate in the way that they do, but how is progression and progress made if the learner is not taken along a sequential pathway of attainments? Well, first of all, try to imagine writing that sequential pathway of attainments for the learning outcomes of intensive interaction. No, not the fundamentals of communication, the other stuff, the deep stuff. Write them down. You can't. We don't know what they are. These things that develop within our brains, we can only vaguely make contact with them and be aware of them, even within our own brain. We can't name or describe them. But with early communication learning, we can, by observation, be aware of the nature of the construction of the social ecology in which these developments can progressively take place. And the key to the progress, it's already been mentioned, it is of course repetition. Sorry, another one of my famous diagrams. How do the infants do it? Probably thousands of repetitions of the interactions in all sorts of circumstances throughout each day. And as the activities are repeated day by week by month, the activities gradually and progressively grow in duration, in content, in sophistication and complexity. The activities spiral upward with success breeding on success. Repetition, repetition. This even more crappy diagram is actually probably a more realistic representation of the nature of the intensive interaction spiral. Intensive interaction borrows this model. The application of it is maybe more intensive, but repetition, repetition. The outcomes are therefore not targeted. They are not objectives. They arise within, emerge as a result of the rolling, cumulative, generative repetitions of the process. So we intensive interaction practitioners, we do not worry that we do not understand all of the learning outcomes, cannot name them, cannot visualize them. We don't need to. We only need to know how to create the circumstances where and how this learning can take place. Okay, to finish then, how are we doing with the pedagogy question? Well, it seems clear that with this model, the emphasis of the learning is centrally on the regular activation of the processes of the interaction. There is then a conscious or unconscious confidence on the part of the teacher that if this happens frequently enough, the desired learning outcomes, or for us at least some of them, maybe many of them, will emerge. So I think we can say this is a process central approach with emergent outcomes. Are there any others? Thank you.